Welcome to the Aravosis Report. I am John Aravosis, and in less than 5 minutes, I'm going to walk you through what happened in Ukraine today and why it matters. Our top story, the BBC is reporting that satellite imagery shows over 1,500 new graves near the occupied town of Mariupol. Next up, New York Times reporting that the Russians are upping their efforts to force Ukrainians to evacuate Kherson province. This is an area where there's expected to be a very large battle coming up soon. The Russians are trying to force the civilians out, possibly because they're afraid of the civilians reporting to the Ukrainians where they are. Next up, an explosion reported at an oil terminal in Russia's Belgorod region. This is right across the border from the Ukrainian town of Kharkiv. Belgorod is a key logistics supply point for the Russian troops fighting in the east. Wall Street Journal is reporting that the resident of my dog, of course, is squeaking and playing in the background, but we're not going to pay attention to her right now. President Biden's top national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, has engaged in recent months in confidential conversations with top aides to Russian President Vladimir Putin in an effort to reduce the risk of a broader conflict over Ukraine, but also to warn Moscow against using nuclear weapons. The Economist says that arrangements have already been made for Iran to supply Russia with missiles. These new missiles will have a range of 300 to 700 kilometers. That's about 200 miles to maybe 450 miles. A Ukrainian Air Force spokesman says the missiles may have to be destroyed at their launch sites in Russia. This is important because up until now, the U.S. and the NATO allies have been trying to urge the Ukrainians not to hit the Russians in Russia proper, even though it looks like they just did in Belgorod, in order to stop Putin from escalating. But if these missiles keep raining down on the Ukrainians and keep destroying their power and their water, the Ukrainians may not have a choice. Russia confirms another senior general, this time General Alexander Lapin, is out after losing the key city of Liman in eastern Ukraine to the Ukrainians. In July, Putin confirmed on Lapin the title of Hero of Russia. Now he's fired. The Washington Post on Saturday reported that U.S. officials have privately encouraged the Ukrainian government to signal an openness to talks with Russia, not to force Ukraine to reach a settlement, but rather for public relations reasons, to make it appear that Ukraine is open to negotiating so the Russians don't get the upper hand in the marketing battle. Mikhail Podolyak, an advisor to the head of Ukraine's presidential office, says that Ukraine has never refused to negotiate with Russia, but that Russian President Vladimir Putin is not ready to do so. Podolyak said that instead, Kyiv will talk with the next leader of the Russian Federation, which pretty much means that they're not looking to negotiate. The Russians, on their part, pretty much said the same thing. The Russians claimed to be open to negotiations with Ukraine, but then turned around and said, but the moment isn't right for talks. Well, if the moment isn't right for talks, then you're not open to negotiations. And our final story tonight, Yevgeny Prigozhin, a Russian billionaire oligarch, the man behind the Russian troll farms, the internet research agency that involved itself in the U.S. elections in 2016 and beyond, also the man who is the founder and the leader of the Wagner Group, the Russian murderous mercenaries fighting in Ukraine and around the world, admitted this week that he is in fact interfering in the U.S. midterm elections on behalf of Russia. That's our Ukraine news for today. I will see you again tomorrow.